Welcome back to Cody Builds. We're back in the shop working on the 1975 Ford F150. In last week's episode, we stripped the frame of all the suspension components. This week, we're going to be working on removing the rest of the bracketry on the back half of the frame in order to install a QA1 coilover conversion kit. Now, I mentioned in a previous episode that I'm a lot like you guys. I'm building this truck week to week. I don't have the budget to go out and buy all the parts I need for this truck all at once. And rather than wait to do all the work until I have the parts, what I've done is I've gone on QA1's website. I went and found the installation guide for the rear and front conversion kits, and I went through them and I figured out exactly what we need to do to this frame before the parts arrive. That's going to save us a bunch of time. If I waited until the parts got here to get the instruction manual, now we're talking another couple shop nights, prepping the frame, getting it ready in order to install that conversion kit. We're going to bypass all that. We're going to get started on the frame modifications before the kit gets here. That way, when it does arrive, we can do the last few little things we need to do, and we can start installing it right away. So on today's episode, like I said, we're going to be focusing on the back half of the frame. We're going to be removing the front leaf spring bracket, the helper spring brackets, the shock mounts. There's a few rivets here that need to be removed for those. The bump stop in the middle of the frame, right under the wheel arch, and then the corresponding helper spring brackets and the back leaf spring bracket as well. Now, on a short bed truck, the instructions for the conversion kit say that the back leaf spring mount is optional for removal, and apparently on the short bed, the true short bed trucks, that back bracket also acts as a bumper mount. So if you're using your bumper, obviously you wouldn't want to remove that. We're not planning to use a bumper. We're going to remove the bumper and remove all the brackets. So all that's going to come off. We'll get the frame all cleaned up and painted when that's all done. Let's get to work. We're going to start up front with the front leaf spring bracket here. There are 4 rivets that hold this bracket in place. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use an air hammer and a chisel, and we're going to try and remove the heads of these rivets, and then we'll see if we can't punch those rivets out of the frame and remove this bracket. First I'm going to try it straight with an air hammer and a chisel and see if that does the trick. If that doesn't do the trick, we'll get in here with a grinder. We'll put a cross in these heads to hopefully weaken them up, and then we'll come back at it with the air hammer and the chisel. I've got the first 3 brackets off, and that was a fight. Also uncovered some issues. Something that I knew was there, but something that we are going to have to deal with here, and I'm going to show you what that is. So we're looking at the frame here. So this is where the front leaf spring bracket was, and nothing too bad there. We've got a little bit of crust behind this cross member here. This is where the problem is. So the 2 brackets that were here, one was for the shock mount, and the other one here was for that bump stop for the helper spring. And look, we got holes here, here. It's paper thin right here in this triangle and right here. And let me explain why that is. So Ford designed these brackets. You see this nice concave back to it. This bracket sits in here like this, and this is tight to the frame. And what happens, you know, this should drain, right? It's curved. But what happens is you get dirt and you get crap off the road and mud, and the bottom of this hole plugs, and then it just fills with dirt and mud and everything else, and it gets wet and it stays wet, and the next thing you know, this section in this pocket where it holds all that material rusts through. On the other side, much of the same, even worse. This is actually more of a design flaw from Ford. This is the shock bracket, and it sits on the inside of the frame this way, like this. Same thing. I mean, look at the other side. We'll show you the other side here that we still got on. Look, you can see it's plugged full of rust and debris. And these had, I wouldn't call it a drain because the hole is about halfway up the bottom of the bracket here. So there's literally no way for this to drain once it fills with muck and water. So you can see the bracket itself is rusted through there, and the frame is rusted through here. Now, the one fortunate thing is that the QA1 system bolts right along this frame rail. That'll put some strength back in, but we can't leave that like this. This is too thin here. The fortunate part is it's pretty isolated to right in those areas where that bracket was holding the debris. If you look just the hole, just an inch over, we've got full frame thickness, and these holes, full frame thickness where the rivets were, but then right where that pocket was on both sides is paper thin. So what we're going to do now that we've got all these rivets out is we're going to plate the inside of the frame here. And the one thing I don't know is where the QA1 system is going to line up, and that's okay. We'll just have to re-drill these holes from the outside for any of the bolt holes that we will actually use. Our bolts that come with the kit may end up being a little short, but that's okay. We can get longer bolts. This needs to be addressed. So I know we're going to have a problem here. I know we're going to have a problem on the other side of the frame. And because you can see here, we're going to have a problem here as well. You can see all this. This is exactly what I'm talking about. So this is that same type of bracket where it should be able to drain out the bottom. You get rocks and muck and everything else that packs up in here. Now you can see this is plumb full all the way to the top. So I know we're going to have a soft spot in the frame back here as well. In general, the frame is in good condition with the exception of these 3 spots on each side. And the back of this frame is a little bit crusty as well. So we may do some reinforcing back around where the rear bumper brackets are. We'll see once I actually get all that off and see what it looks like. This is just a bear. This is going to take longer than anything else I've done so far, getting these rivets out. There is no easy way to do this, at least not that I have available to me. The air chisel seems to be about the best for removing the rivet heads. But then once I get the heads off, these things are so rusted in to the frame that they do not want to budge. You punch and punch and punch on them and they don't want to budge. I tried using a punch with the air chisel. The problem with that is it starts to mushroom out the end of the rivet, and that makes it even more difficult. So it's really a battle. We're just going to have to keep at it, be persistent, chisel away the heads, and then grind them down smooth so we've got nothing resisting the opening of the frame, and keep doing what we're doing. So we'll keep at it here. I'll bring you back in if I find anything else. Otherwise, I'll time-lapse a lot of this work, and we'll pick back up when I'm ready to knock the back bumper off. there's all the carnage. All the brackets off that we need to get off for the QA1 coilover suspension kit. I would say it took me about 2 hours to get the first 3 brackets off and about an hour to get the rest of them. Once I had it kind of a process in place, it was much quicker. I found the easiest thing to do was to chisel the rivet heads off, go back with a grinder and grind the rivet head down flush with whatever bracket it was on, and then use the bracket to break it loose from the frame, so beat on the bracket until it came loose from the frame. And then chisel out, use the air chisel to and a punch to chisel out the rivet from the frame. That ended up working the best. A little more damage on this side, same thing. We've got some damage, rust damage in here. Up here is the same thing as the other side, not quite as bad up here. So it's thin here and here where those bump stops and the spring bracket, the shock brackets were. So we're going to have to do a lot of patching. You know, if I was advising you, would you build this truck? I wouldn't. If it didn't mean anything to you, I would try and find a different frame probably. But this truck does mean something to me, so it's worth the extra effort to cut the rod out, get it patched up, get it right. With the extra reinforcement we're going to get from the QA1 suspension brackets in the back and the patches, I don't see any issue at all. I think it'll be stronger than it would be if we weren't bracing the frame. So we'll have to do some patching on both sides, up around the hump here, and then back by the bumper back here. If you can see through here, we've got rot in this back cross member as well as in the frame there. So we'll get that all cut out. Now next up, we're going to cut this old hitch and bumper off the back of this truck. Now, I don't know if this was my grandpa's handiwork or my father's handiwork, or if it was the guy that came before him, before my grandfather owned the truck. Look at this hitch. We've got 1, 2, 3 pieces of angle iron, and they're just butt welded to the side, and that's just butt welded up to the frame. I know for a fact this truck hauled extremely heavy trailers with a lot of lumber on them. Yeah, I'm just gonna probably leave it at that. There's a chance we'll put a hitch back in this truck. It won't look anything like that. I've got a home-built teardrop camper, and I would really like to tow that with this truck. So after we get all the rest of the chassis mods done, and maybe once we get the QA1 suspension in, we'll come back. You know, we might even add the hitch later after the truck's finished, just because I want to see how this thing sits, what the stance looks like, and get a feel for whether it's even reasonable to put a hitch on the back of this thing. So we're not going to go too crazy there yet, but that is in the plans. So next up here, I'm going to get to taking out these bumper bracket bolts, and then I'm going to have to cut these brackets off the bottom of the frame that are holding the hitch in place. Yeah, it should be pretty straightforward. So I'll go ahead and get to it. bumper deleted, brackets off the side of the frame deleted. We're just about ready for our coilover conversion kit. All we've got left to do is to notch the frame here in the wheel arch, and the kit actually comes with a template for that. And then we've got to cut some of this frame that's curled under here out. I'm not going to do any of that until after we do all of the frame repairs that need to be done. I don't want to take any strength or rigidity out of this frame until we've patched up some of these really nasty rust holes. I mean, they're pretty bad. So we're going to get frame patches on the inside. I may even end up cutting this section out once we've got a patch on the inside and doubling that wall thickness up there. We'll just have to see. I'm going to give it some thought, but it is repairable, and we'll get it fixed and we'll get it right. That's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for hanging out with me in the garage as we continue to get this frame prepped for the next steps of the project. The next time we're in the garage together, we're going to be working on the front of the frame. We're going to be getting this ready for, again, for the front coilover conversion kit. We're going to be removing the spring pockets, much of the same type of work that we did on the back half of the frame. So removing rivets, pulling these mounts out, removing the engine mounts. We'll be bracing the front of the frame and removing the cross member. So if that's something that you're interested in, please tune in next week. Give me a like and a subscribe if you like what we're doing on this channel. And until next week, keep building.